here with our kind of wrap up section, which is 1.7. 1.7, which is kind of comparisons of the period, right? Comparisons, political comparisons from 1200 to 1450. Okay. This is 1.7, right? Yeah. Okay. So the kind of one of the key ideas here is that we see states and core areas of the world grow larger. So we see larger states, right, during this time period. They talk about core areas, but that's pretty true throughout most of the world, right? Especially more centralized, right? A lot more central power, especially as we saw in Europe, not necessarily in like places like northern India, right? And then they talk about the growth of the Mongols, which we haven't really gotten to yet, but we will very shortly in the next unit. The growth of the Mongols in Asia really consolidates power within that region, right? And then in other places, not only in Asia as well, but also in Africa, in the Middle East, in South Asia, and Southeast Asia, is the role of Islam in state building as well. It becomes quite pronounced during this time period. Right. So kind of some new empires that the book wants to make sure we know about. We have the Song Dynasty in China, which continues the kind of technological and cultural progress of the region. The Abbasid Caliphate is broken up during this time period pretty quickly in the Middle East. As we saw, but at the same time, we then see new Muslim states in Africa, in the Middle East, and Spain. In Africa, the Middle East, and Spain. Even the Mongols will become Muslim that conquer the Middle East as well, right? We have the trade states of South Asia in Vijayanagar and Chol. Chol and Vijayanagar in South Asia, southern South Asia, right, the coastal areas. And then we have the Delhi Sultanate in northern India, which is more land-based, right? We have the Mali Empire in West Africa. The Mali in West Africa, and their major focus is kind of controlling trade, and they're even bigger than their predecessors, Ghana, right? We have the Aztecs in the Americas with the tributary state, and then we have the Inca in the Andes, they don't create a tributary state, but they actually create a very centralized state with the help of the Mita system. Right, but elsewhere in the Americas, not a whole lot of centralization. In Europe, we see the increase in importance of centralized states over their nobles. Right, increase in centralized states at the expense of feudalism, of the feudal nobles. Right. And then the kind of one exception to this major rule of more centralization is Japan. They decline into feudal states and decentralization right around the time that Europe is kind of getting away from that. Right. In each society, right, we see religion play a key role in state building. Okay, so let's take a look here. So the one they really want to bring up is Islam, right? That's kind of the key world, right? Islam or let's call it Dar al-Islam, right? Right. All of these Muslim states use Islam as kind of the unifying force of their society, right? In China, the key religious system is Confucianism, that helps unify the state. I mean, Confucianism was kind of built to help unify the state, right? Especially with the bureaucracy, right? The civil service exam and the bureaucracy, right? We also then see Neo-Confucianism later on, right? It's kind of the evolving form of Confucianism, and also helps kind of consolidate power, or at least it spreads to Korea and to Japan. Japan doesn't necessarily use it as well as Korea does, right? In South and Southeast Asia, right? In South and Southeast Asia, we see Hinduism and Buddhism used to strengthen states, right? To consolidate power. Okay. In Europe, it's very different. Not very different, but initially, right? Initially, the church, the Roman Catholic Church, is crucial in the building of states, right? Crucial in kind of controlling state building, actually, in Europe, right? And helping kind of define which states are powerful as they gave them approval or gave them disapproval, right? And on top of that, because states were, because we had such weak states early on in post-Rome Europe, right? What this leads to is the church kind of acts as the unifying force within Western Europe, right? However, what we see as we get to 1200, we see powerful states challenge the power of the church, right? Challenge the church's power over political, economic, and social forces in Europe. And we'll kind of see the conclusion of that in the next time period, right? We see some religions also kind of have focus on missionary activity and missionary religions. Specifically, Christianity and Buddhism are guided to spread their religion to others, right? Pretty explicitly. That's not to say we don't see other religions, right? We see Islam make its way into South and Southeast Asia, right? Let's say South Asia, actually. Let's not focus on Southeast Asia just yet. And it gets there mostly by invasion, right? By invaders kind of doing their thing. But despite this, we do see Hinduism as the major religion still in South Asia, right? Which is going to set up a kind of conflict over time. Conflicts between Islam and Hinduism in South Asia going forward, right? And then lastly, about kind of the spread of religion, trade networks really help to spread these religions, whether they are Christian or Buddhism, which are focused on doing that, or Islam, and even some other ones. Trade networks spread the religion. Okay, so we also see trade help build states as well, right? So let's talk about that for a little bit. Okay, so some of the innovations that we see kind of help the trade that helps create better, stronger states, right? We talk about champa rice. Champa rice to China from Vietnam, right? Really helps grow the population there. Let's see here. So with that increase in population, the increase in population leads to a growing population. So that growing population leads to an increase in manufacturing, especially of two key goods, porcelain and silk. And of course, porcelain and silk then become kind of the major goods that they will trade, as well as steel and iron, right? And so we see the Song become incredibly powerful because of that. Okay. Paper from China as well helps consolidate power in many areas, right? So that makes its way across Eurasia, and it leads to an increased literacy in Europe, in the Middle East, and in Africa as well, right? And so that really helps grow these states as well, right? And so, especially with the House of Wisdom in Baghdad, right? The focus of mathematics and literature, right? By the excuse me, not literature, but medicine, right? Leads to innovations in Islamic thought during this time period, right? So we see the two other like kind of trades that incidentally create better economies are the Crusades and the Mongol conquests, right? The Crusades and the Mongol conquests helped spread new technologies and ideas, right? And so these really helped build up Europe, especially, right? Um, let's see here. And so the last thing to kind of really point out here are the impact of nomadic peoples. This is kind of the last gasp of the nomadic groups, but these last gasps are probably the strongest we've seen in history. Let's do that. I did it. I went too far. There we go. Okay. So the Mongols, and I believe this next section is going to talk a lot more about the Mongols, but the Mongols especially help control Asia, and that control leads to stability, political stability within Asia, and that stability leads to a lot of cross-cultural interaction and trade increase, and really helps economic growth. Right. So the kind of more lasting impact, the Mongols are very impactful, don't get me wrong, but the more lasting nomadic group will be the Turkish groups, right? Right, the Turkish nomads from Central Asia, right? Really kind of lay roots down a little bit in a little bit better way than the Mongols do, right? They will take over. They will take over large stretches of the Mediterranean. They will take over large stretches of Persia and South Asia, starting around 1450, and help create stability in these areas, right? We do have different empires in these three regions, right, which we'll talk about in the next unit, the Ottoman, Safavids, and Mughals, right? And so these really create a lot of stability and cross-cultural exchange and commerce in these regions, right? The very, very last thing that we see is the increase in patriarchy due to religion. Increase in patriarchy due to religion and economic growth. Right. We do see some opportunities for women in monastic communities, right, and in Buddhism and Christianity and Jainism. Monastic orders, and I'm going to focus on Christianity and Buddhism. Right. Whereas in China, we see foot binding kind of lead to a decline in the role of women in these societies during this time period. Okay. So in the final table here on page 68, we see kind of the four types of state building. We have new states, where we see the Mamluks, the Seljuks, and the Delhi Sultanates. Actually, I'm going to write these. Let me get a table up here. Make them different colors. So we have new states, created during this time period out of nothing, with the Mamluks in Egypt, the Seljuks in the Middle East, and then the Delhi Sultanate in northern India. Oops, excuse me. We see former empires revived. Which includes the Song dynasty, which is kind of replenishing the Han dynasty, the Mali Empire, which represents which reinvigorates the old Ghanaian Empire, and then the Holy Roman Empire, which is going back to the old Roman Empire. Now, that's not to say they're like directly related to them, but they're kind of like using those ideas or using those cultural touchstones to kind of create power. We have the synthesis of different traditions kind of coming together to form new states in many places. The examples here being Japan, which blends Confucianism and Confucianism, Buddhism, but then Japanese traditions of Shinto. The Delhi Sultanate, which combines Hinduism and Islam. A sultanate. Let me redo that. And then Neo-Confucianism and throughout all of East Asia, blending traditions. And then lastly, we see an expansion in scope of kind of just like more territory and more powers of previous societies, right? And so those include the Aztecs in the Americas, in Mesoamerica, the Inca in South America. We see the East African, the Swahili coast city-states. And then lastly, we see the Southeast Asian city-states. So this is really just like kind of the first time we've talked about these societies. These societies kind of gone into the international scale, right? And that is going to do it for Unit 1. I know I made them say Period 1 in the PDFs. That's my fault. I apologize. I'm just used to that term. But we will start. We'll pick up next time with topic 2.